My name is Marin Ashford, and I was 31 the night my father slid a white envelope across the kitchen table to my younger brother. Inside was $55,000 for his down payment. When I quietly asked about my own plans, my mother patted my wrist and said, "You'll figure something out. Sweetheart, you've always managed just fine." My brother got a house that night. I got a compliment with a blade hidden inside it. What I did over the next 2 years, my family never saw coming, and when they finally did see it, they asked me for something that still takes my breath away to think about. Let me take you back to that dining room outside Spokane, Washington, where it all started with roast chicken, a white envelope, and a sentence my mother believed was kindness. You need a little history first. In our house, money moved in one direction, toward my brother, Dallin. He was 3 years older, and his whole life came with a safety net stitched underneath it. When he wrecked his truck at 19, they replaced it. When he dropped out of community college, they quietly paid off the loan. When his credit card debt hit 5 figures at 27, my mother cashed in a bond she'd been saving since before I was born. Nobody explained the rule to me. I just learned it the way you learn a stove is hot. Help in our family went to whoever was struggling loudest. I never struggled loudly. I worked as a paralegal downtown, tutored on weekends, lived small, and drove a 9-year-old sedan with a cracked windshield I never bothered to fix. Here's what nobody at that table knew. By the night of the envelope, I had $41,000 sitting quietly in a savings account. I'd built $500 at a time since I was 22. In my family, having money you didn't need was like leaving a porch light on at noon. They were about to learn exactly what the point of it was. It was a Sunday in April. The good tablecloth out. Dallin had been talking for 20 minutes about a house on Larchmont Drive. 4 bedrooms. $260,000. Granite countertops mentioned 3 times like a magic word. He was 34 and between jobs again. Consulting, which as far as I could tell meant sleeping until 10 most mornings. Then my father reached into his jacket and slid the envelope across the table. $55,000. He said, "Your mother and I talked it over. It's time somebody in this family got a real start." My mother had her hands folded like she was in church. Dallin's eyes went wet, and he hugged them both. And I sat there doing arithmetic I couldn't stop. $55,000 was years of overtime and skipped vacations. I waited for someone to turn to me. I actually waited. Then I heard my own voice. Quiet and even. "That's wonderful for Dallin. I've actually been thinking about buying somewhere myself. Any chance there's help for me too?" Someday. The room changed texture. My father studied his plate. My mother reached over, patted my hand twice, and said the sentence that built everything that came after. "Oh, honey, you'll figure something out. You've always managed just fine." Dallin laughed. Not unkindly. Just easily. The way you laugh when the whole world seems to agree with you. Someone changed the subject to countertops. I finished my chicken and said almost nothing. And underneath that tablecloth, something in me quietly shut a door and locked it. I drove home that night and wrote a number on a notepad, $41,200. Underneath it, I wrote what I knew, which wasn't much, except that Spokane still had some of the most affordable starter homes in the region, and that I was done asking anyone at that table for anything. Ever again. The decision didn't feel angry. It felt like turning off a faucet that had been dripping my entire life. The next morning, I called a local credit union. The loan officer, a varm, no-nonsense woman named Priya, ran my numbers and came back with a figure about $25,000 lower than I'd hoped. A paralegal's salary is a paralegal's salary. "Is that enough to buy anything worth owning?" I asked. "Depends how picky you are," she said. I decided right then that whatever the bank offered would be enough. Because I would make it enough. The answer met every second Thursday in a community center basement. The Spokane Real Estate Investors Circle. Folding chairs. Bad coffee. A laminated sign-in sheet. I found them through a library stack of real estate books I read on my lunch breaks. In the corner sat an older man named Otis Reyes. 74. 40 years, a landlord. Who said almost nothing and was treated like royalty when he did. I introduced myself and told him I wanted a duplex. Live in one unit. Rent the other. He looked at me the way you'd look at a parking meter. Everybody wants to be a landlord, he said, until a toilet calls them at 2 a.m. Then he refilled his coffee and walked off. I drove home strangely happy. He hadn't told me it was a bad idea. He'd told me the price. And prices were something I understood. It took Otis 3 meetings to remember my name. By early summer, I'd found a listing that smelled like a beginning a 1930 brick duplex on Larch Street. One unit occupied by a longtime tenant named Miss Odell. The other empty and rough. Asking price $139,000. Before closing, I called my father and asked if he'd walk the property with me on a Saturday. Since he'd spent 30 years as an electrician and could read old wiring like sheet music, there was a pause I could have parked a truck in. Then, sure, kiddo. Saturday at 10. He sounded like a man who'd been waiting to be asked something and hadn't realized it. Saturday came with rain. At 10:15, my phone buzzed. Dallin's water heater had burst in his new basement. My father needed to run over with the shop vac. Rain check. I sat in my car outside the duplex for a full minute, watching rain crawl down the windshield. Then went in alone. Because my inspector was already on the porch and my money spent whether I was disappointed or not. The inspection turned up old wiring insurance companies hate. About $6,000 to fix. I wrote the seller a calm letter asking for that amount off the price. They came back at $4,000. I said, $6,000 or I walk. And I priced the walk into my voice. They took it. I closed on Larch Street alone that June. A small brass key sat in my palm. And I was a homeowner. And not one person in my family knew. Except my loan officer in the state of Washington. That first summer, I patched plaster after work. Learned that paint is a love language. And mowed my own lawn with a push mower from an estate sale. My housing costs dropped to under $300 a month while Miss Odell's rent covered most of the mortgage. Every spare dollar went back into savings. Along with every overtime hour the firm would give me, I kept going to Sunday dinners and kept my mouth shut. Right up until the Sunday I decided to test the water. I mentioned I'd been looking into rental property. My mother laughed. Not cruelly. The way you laugh at a child who says she wants to be an astronaut. On a paralegal's salary, honey. The taxes alone. My father told a story about a rental with raccoons. Dallin talked about crown molding. I made a decision that day. I'd keep for 18 months. They had answered my question. I would not ask it again. In the fall, I found a second property. A small 2-bedroom on Maple Court. $88,000. Sold as is by out-of-state heirs. I did the demolition myself and rented it out by winter to a hospital records clerk and her daughter. Around then, I ran into Dallin at a hardware store, loading a $600 pizza oven onto a cart. Paid for with a card that had our mother's name on it. He talked for 10 minutes about getting into house flipping with a buddy and never once asked what I was doing there. Covered in drywall dust. That winter, I found a wooden key rack at an estate sale. 4 brass hooks. Carved flowers worn soft with age. I mounted it by my back door. On the first hook went the Larch Street key. On the second, Maple Court. Looking at the 2 empty hooks, I heard my mother's voice again. You've always managed just fine, I decided, out loud, in my empty kitchen, that if fine was my inheritance, I would multiply it. 1 year to fill the other 2 hooks. Not $1 of anyone's envelope. I worked constantly. I missed my college roommate's wedding because a contractor could only come that Saturday. And I've never quite forgiven myself for the excuse I gave her instead of the truth. My coworker, Bree, the only person who really saw any of it, once asked me, "Who exactly are you trying to prove this to?" I didn't have a real answer yet. By spring, I refinanced Maple Court, pulled out roughly $24,000 in equity, and used it as the down payment on a third property, a brick bungalow near the hospital shuttle stop that rented within a week. The third key went on the third hook. Then Otis called me himself, which he'd never done. He walked me through a duplex 2 blocks from the park, his very first rental, bought over 40 years earlier. His daughter was in Arizona. His knees were done with basements, and he wanted to sell it to someone who'd take care of it. $128,000. He said, "I'll carry the note myself. 10% down. No bank. No circus." His condition bring him every financial record I had. I spread 3 binders across his kitchen table one Sunday. He read for over 2 hours, corrected my repair reserves twice, and finally said, "Tuesday, my attorney's office. Bring the down payment." That December, almost exactly 18 months after the night of the envelope, I closed on the 4th property. The 4th key went on the 4th brass hook, and I sat on my kitchen floor and cried. Hard. For about 30 seconds. Before it passed like weather. 4 properties. 8 rental units. Not one soul in my family knew any of it existed. Then, in February, a reporter from the local business journal reached out, having heard about me through the investors' circle. I agreed, on the condition every number be verified. The story ran on the front page of the business section. A photo of me on the Larch Street porch, arms crossed. A small chart of my numbers beside a quote about not waiting for anyone to catch my mistakes. My aunt saw it first and texted the family group chat. "Is this our Marin?" My father wrote. "That's your grandfather's brick on that porch." From my mother. For 4 full days. Nothing. On the 5th day, she called and asked me to come by the house. My parents and Dallin were arranged in the kitchen like a jury that hadn't agreed on its verdict. 2 years. My mother said, before I'd even taken off my coat. 2 years sneaking around, buying up half the city. And I find out from your aunt. You lied to this family. I told her nobody had lied. Nobody had ever asked. Dallin, leaning against the counter, said, "So what? You finally bought yourself a house. Congratulations." I looked at my brother and asked, quietly, "Which one?" The refrigerator hummed. Nobody answered. The fallout came fast. Distant cousins needed loans. An old family friend had an investment opportunity. And my mother, I later learned, told everyone who'd listen, "Well, we never had to worry about Marin. That girl always lands on her feet," turning my silence into her own peace of mind. But that Thursday evening, my father's truck pulled up outside Larch Street. He didn't come in, just stood at the bottom of the steps looking at the brickwork. "Your grandfather laid brick on half this street. You know, rewired most of it too." He touched the porch post like checking a pulse. "You've got his hands." Then he left before I trusted my voice to answer. Dallin showed up alone a few days later. Something that had never once happened between us. Sitting at my kitchen table, he admitted he'd lost his real job back in November. That the consulting had been a story for years. That his flip house was underwater and his partner had stopped answering. And that he was 2.5 months behind on his own mortgage. "I keep waiting to feel like I own that house," he said. "It's never once felt like mine." My mother beat the family meeting by 3 days. She showed up with a coffee cake, toured the place, and stopped in front of my key rack. She told me, for the first time in 31 years, that when her own father died, the family farm went entirely to her brother, because he needed it more. That's just how it was done. She said, I made my peace. You feed the child who's drowning. Marin, that's triage, not favoritism. On her way out, as casually as picking up a coaster, she added, Sunday. Then, and bring your checkbook. Sunday. Same tablecloth. My father slid a manila folder across the table instead of an envelope this time. A refinance worksheet with a cosigner line highlighted in yellow, meant to fold Dallin's failing equity line back into a manageable payment. It's just a signature, my mother said, eyes wet and certain. You wanted to be part of this family. Honey, this is what family does. I asked Dallin, calmly, what he owed, how far behind he was, and what his actual income looked like right now. The table went quiet. On paper, I could have signed and survived it. But I thought about 4 brass hooks, and every Sunday I'd spent proving something to a jury that was never going to convene. I set the pen down on the far side of the folder. No, I said, I won't sign, and I won't write a check. But here's what I will do. I looked at my brother. Every Sunday, you and me, my kitchen table, we build a real budget off your actual income. We call the bank about hardship terms before this goes to collections. We list your house to actually sell, not to save face. And when it sells, you walk away clean. After that, my Maple Court unit needs a tenant this summer. You'll apply like anyone else. And if your numbers pass, you'll sign a standard lease and pay on the first like everybody in this family should have learned to. My mother stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. He's your brother, not an applicant. You've got 4 houses. Marin, 4. And you offer him paperwork. She ran out of words right at the edge of something she'd never had to say out loud before. I stood too. Not fast. You're right. I have 4 houses. And you never once had to worry about me. I know that was your compliment. So hear mine back. I'm fine. Mom, I made sure of that myself. Because somebody at this table had to. I said goodnight into a silence with a heartbeat in it. I was halfway down the front walk when I heard the storm door. My father, hatless in the cold, said only, send Dallin the Sunday Times. Then he went back inside. I drove home with the radio off, waiting for a collapse that never came. Standing in my dark kitchen, I felt the strangest lightness. The streetlight lit up 4 brass hooks on my wall, and I understood that I'd spent 2 years building a courtroom for a jury that would never be seated, because the verdict had been written long before I was born. In a farmhouse kitchen that belonged to my mother's own father, just before midnight, my phone buzzed once. Dallin. No apology. No speech. Just what time Sunday I laughed until I had to hold the counter. Texted back 9. Bring your bank statements. And hung my car key on the first hook, right where it fit. His house sold that spring for $240,000. After payoff and closing costs, he walked away with a little over $5,000 and, for the first time in his adult life, 0 debt. The warehouse job came through. He moved into Maple Court under a standard lease, paid his own deposit, and has made every rent payment early since. 4 months running. Some Sundays my father's truck is already parked outside when Dallin arrives with his binder. Because apparently my gutters require his personal supervision, my mother hasn't set foot on Larch Street since the coffee cake. We're polite at family events, like former coworkers. A card came for my birthday last year signed only Mom. I've stopped waiting for her to say more, because I understand now whose kitchen table taught her the ledger she handed me. Otis still sends postcards from Arizona. No greeting. Just a line or two. The last one said the books had better still be clean. They are. Here's the only thing I know for certain after all of it. Being fine was never the consolation prize they made it sound like. It was the inheritance I ended up writing for myself. One key at a time. And nobody gets to slide it across a table. And nobody gets to take it back. If you've spent your whole life being the one who was always fine, this is your sign. Build the thing anyway.